The Sida shooting was a mass murder that occurred at an observation post of the Russian peacekeeping forces near the village of Sida in the Gali district of Abkhazia on the east coast of the Black Sea on June 1, 1997, when 42-year-old Staff Sergeant Artur Vaganov killed 10 of his comrades and wounded 3 others, before turning the gun on himself. At 5 a.m. MST on June 1, Sergeant Vaganov entered the barracks of Observation Post 203 in the northern security zone near the villages of Sida and Abkhazia, about 15 kilometers south of Galien. After cutting the post's communications and disabling all other weapons, opened fire with his AK-47 rifle on his comrades who were sleeping in their beds. He then proceeded to the second floor and killed the company commander, Sergei Gavrilov, and wounded Alexei Smotrin, chief of the observation post. Vaganov eventually committed suicide by shooting himself in the head. A sentry was alerted by the gunshots and rushed into the room, but he had already killed 10 of the 19 soldiers stationed at the post and seriously wounded 3 others. On May 14, 1994, after the Abkhaz-Georgian War, an agreement was signed by the belligerents to deploy CIS peacekeeping forces at the Abkhaz-Georgian border with the task to oversee the ceasefire. The first Russian forces arrived in Abkhazia on June 23 the same year and numbered about 1,600 people at the time of the shooting. Artur Vaganov was an ethnic Russian from Bashkiria. He did 2 years of compulsory service in a reconnaissance battalion of the Totskoy division, rising to the rank of staff sergeant and becoming second in command of a platoon. After a year back in civilian life, he voluntarily enlisted to join the peacekeeping forces in the zone of the Georgian-Abkhaz conflict, the Volga Military District's 27th Peacekeeping Division. The platoon, of which Vaganov was deputy leader, arrived in Abkhazia on April 15, 1997, and commenced their peacekeeping duties at Post 203 2 days later. Motive: the possibility that Vaganov was under the influence of alcohol at the time of the incident is one line of inquiry. While not explicitly confirmed, the investigating officer, Lieutenant General Babankov's mention of drunkenness suggests this was considered a plausible explanation by investigators. The presence or absence of alcohol in Vaganov's system at the time of the event would be a crucial piece of evidence, though its availability is not detailed in the summary, and testimony from observers to his general behavior contradicted any previous abuse of alcohol. This could have been quickly dismissed, and it is a curious omission. Babankov also alluded to the potential role of hazing within the Russian military. Hazing, a pervasive issue in many militaries worldwide, involves the systematic harassment, abuse, and humiliation of junior or introvert personnel by their superiors. The cumulative stress and psychological trauma inflicted by hazing could potentially trigger extreme acts of violence, as tragically exemplified by Vaganov's actions. The extent to which Vaganov experienced hazing and whether this directly contributed to his actions remains speculative without further investigative details. Vaganov was generally given positive references regarding his service and was described by a UN military observer and a spokesman of the Russian peacekeeping forces as a very demanding and efficient soldier with high standards, who neither drank nor smoked, though also as someone who was psychologically not suited to the job. Vaganov's actions demonstrate a premeditated and targeted approach. He specifically chose to engage his victims while they were asleep, indicating a desire to maximize lethality and minimize the possibility of resistance or defense. This suggests a level of planning and premeditation beyond a spontaneous act of aggression. The victims of the June 2, 1997 incident were all fellow Russian soldiers serving alongside Sergeant Vaganov. Those killed were First Lieutenant Sergei Gavrilov, Junior Sergeant Alexander Medvedev, Junior Sergeant Dmitry Stepanov, Junior Sergeant Alexei Yurchkov, Private Alexander Lukyanenko, Private Oleg Mednikov, Private Oskar Norisbaev, Private Andrei Semenikin, Private Sergei Sherbakov, Private Regel Sabiv. Those wounded were Private Konstantin Snegerev, Private Oleg Golko, and Sergeant Alexei Smotrin. Vaganov's actions before the massacre. Vaganov's plan involved the systematic disabling of the personal weaponry belonging to his fellow conscripts. This act of preemptive disarmament rendered his victims defenseless against his actions. The consolidated research indicates that he successfully disarmed a significant number of his comrades, ensuring they could not effectively resist or defend themselves. Targeting sleeping soldiers. The evidence suggests Vaganov specifically chose a moment when his fellow soldiers were asleep, further highlighting his calculated approach. This strategic choice maximized his advantage, eliminating any possibility of immediate counteraction or defense. Vaganov's actions reveal a chilling level of premeditation. His aim was not simply to harm a few individuals. His intention was to eliminate all 19 men on duty at the post. While he did not succeed in killing everyone, the fact that he attempted to do so underscores the severity and calculated nature of his actions. The investigation's initial stages centered on securing the scene, collecting evidence, and interviewing survivors and witnesses. Given the involvement of Russian peacekeeping forces, higher-ranking officers from the Russian military were quickly dispatched to Abkhazia to oversee the investigation, the focus being on establishing a timeline of events leading up to the incident, determining the method used, and identifying the perpetrator's motives. Vaganov's actions were clearly premeditated, therefore a main objective of the investigation would be to determine what drove Vaganov to commit such a crime. Lieutenant General Dolia Babinkov's statement of the senior investigating officer, in a statement to the Interfax news agency, offered insight into the tragic events of June 2, 1997. His statement suggested explanations for Sergeant Artur Vaganov's actions. Babinkov's statement highlighted the two primary avenues of investigation: intoxication and hazing. He suggested that Vaganov may have been under the influence of alcohol, impairing his judgment and contributing to his erratic behavior. Babinkov also pointed towards the possibility that hazing within the Russian military played a significant role in the events. He suggested that Vaganov may have been subjected to severe hazing, leading to a buildup of resentment and ultimately culminating in his actions. While Babinkov's statement to Interfax did not offer definitive conclusions, his comments suggested that Vaganov's actions were not an isolated incident, but rather a symptom of deeper, systemic problems within the ranks. We will touch on this later. Unanswered questions. The two key aspects of Babinkov's motivation theory are both open to further scrutiny. The alcohol theory contradicts evidential observations that he was not a drinker, and could have been quickly proven with the results of a toxicology test. Vaganov was a senior NCO. The only person who could haze Vaganov from a hierarchical perspective would have been his company commander. And hazing is a group activity, therefore it is a stretch of the imagination to think that soldiers would haze their superiors, even worse, do it under the direction of their officer. Comparison to similar incidents. The Gorbunov incident a week before Artur Vaganov's actions in Abkhazia. A similar incident unfolded in Siberia. Private Yevgeny Gorbunov, a 22-year-old fellow soldier in the Russian military, perpetrated a comparable act of violence at Chita, Siberia. The details, while less comprehensively reported, paint a grim picture similar but not identical to Vaganov's massacre. Gorbunov's actions resulted in the loss of 6 lives. His victims included 5 fellow soldiers and 1 officer. The exact circumstances surrounding the event remain somewhat obscure, lacking the detailed reporting afforded to the Abkhazia incident. However, the parallel nature of the events, a single soldier eliminating multiple comrades, suggests a potential common thread. Both Gorbunov and Vaganov were serving soldiers within the Russian military. Both incidents involved the elimination of multiple sleeping comrades. The significant difference lies in the age and rank of the 2 soldiers. The motives were suggested as being similar with one difference. Low morale was also suggested in the case of Gorbunov's outfit. Gorbunov did not turn the weapon on himself, rather he fled with it and additional magazines, which suggest he was prepared to fight it out should he be pursued, which he was and apprehended. His fate is unknown, as the Russian military has not disclosed any details of how and if he was punished. It is reasonable to assume Gorbunov could have been a victim of hazing due to his junior rank. His use of alcohol was not stated, but the low morale is an issue that would not sit well with the army, as it suggests a failure of the system. This additional factor, whilst not stated in the Vaganov incident, would be more likely, as Vaganov was a senior NCO who was not a noted drinker. Abkhazia's geopolitical landscape. The location of the incident is a region situated on the Black Sea coast, geographically part of Georgia. However, its geopolitical status is complex and highly contested. Abkhazia declared its independence from Georgia in 1992 following a period of intense conflict. This declaration is not internationally recognized by most countries, with Georgia maintaining its claim to sovereignty over the territory. The conflict involved significant loss of life and displacement of populations. The ensuing years have been marked by a fragile peace, with ongoing tensions and unresolved issues. Vaganov's military career. Vaganov's service record within the Russian peacekeeping force remains largely undocumented in the available summary. However, we know he held the rank of staff sergeant, This suggests a period of service sufficient to achieve this senior non-commissioned officer rank, indicating a commitment of several years of dedicated and reliable service within the military structure. The exact nature of Vaganov's duties as a sergeant in a peacekeeping force isn't explicitly stated. However, his responsibilities included maintaining order, ensuring the security of his unit, and potentially overseeing the training or supervision of conscripts. The fact that he had access to and controlled the weaponry of his fellow soldiers points to a position of authority and responsibility within the unit's operational structure. Prior to the incident, Vaganov's performance and conduct within the peacekeeping force are unknown, but his continued service would suggest his behavior to be normal for his rank and position. There is no mention of prior disciplinary issues or any indication of behavioral problems that might have foreshadowed the events. The sudden and violent nature of his actions suggests a potential precipitating factor. Something in him clicked, but it wasn't as hot-blooded that he didn't prepare for the shooting. Conclusion. The two incidents at Sida and Sida were similar but highly likely driven by alternative motives. The assumption that Vaganov acted from a combination of alcohol and bullying is highly questionable. He was far from an ideal hazing candidate and drank occasionally, whilst having a responsible role within the unit that would require him to command respect from his subordinates. Gorbanov, on the other hand, could well have been a victim of hazing and alcohol due to his junior position. A likely candidate in both cases could have been morale. This would be a more widespread and something the military would be less likely to admit in Vaganov's case as someone of his rank. Lacking morale would suggest he feels the system has failed him to such an extent that he sees those around him as the perpetrators.